Welcome to the Ghost Talkers podcast, the show dedicated to unsolved history and paranormal mystery. Each week, we delve into something new, from true ghost stories to conversations with psychics, authors, historians, and the dead. If you're scared right now, it's probably because you just listened to Ghost Talkers podcast.
Hello and welcome. I'm investigative medium Laine Crosby, here with my co-host, Ghost of Gettysburg author Mark Nesbitt, and you're listening to Ghost Talkers on the ghostchannel.tv. This is a special episode for me because I'm excited to host one of my dear friends, Patty Wilson, who has co-authored a number of very popular books with my co-host Mark Nesbitt, and also appears on the Eastern State Penitentiary episode of Mysterious Journeys with me. And we also have Scott Crownover today, who I think is a techie extraordinaire. And Scott just appeared with us on Mysterious Journeys on the Ghost of Gettysburg episode on the Travel Channel. I gotta tell you, Scott Crownover is the go-to guy for capturing spirit photography and for cleaning up electronic voice phenomena. Tell us more, Mark.
Tonight we have a couple of special guests, which I'm really excited about. Patty Wilson is a dear friend of mine and also my co-author on Haunted Pennsylvania. So we have worked together on that, and we also have an announcement on another book that we're going to be working together on, that we are working together on right now, which we're going to save for a little bit and we'll talk about later.
Oh, great.
And Scott Crownover, who I admire greatly for his expertise in some of the more technical aspects of ghost hunting. As a matter of fact, he has done some absolutely groundbreaking work, Laine, in some scientific areas of ghost hunting that we'll talk about a little bit later. We'll get him to explain all that scientific stuff to us. But at any rate, I just want to welcome Patty Wilson and Scott Crownover. How you doing, guys? Patty?
Hi. Hi.
Hey, how you doing?
Just fine. How you doing, Mark? Hi, Laine.
Hey.
Very good, Mark. How are you doing?
Good, good.
How are you, Laine?
I'm doing great, and I'm just thrilled to have you guys here tonight. I've enjoyed working with Patty so much, and I've enjoyed working with you also, Scott. And I've seen your pictures, and Patty's told me some wonderful stories that are so interesting. I'm excited about exploring all of this with you.
Let's talk a little bit about how Patty got started. Patty, you're obviously an author. How many books do you have now out? How many have you written?
I believe it's 6 out now and 3 more coming out within next year.
Oh, that's fabulous. That's great. You did Booze and Brews, and you had your own Haunted Pennsylvania out.
Long ago.
It's mostly local Pennsylvania ghost stories up until just recently, right?
Yeah, it actually started out as a collection of family and local central Pennsylvania stories, and when I sent it to the publisher, she really liked it, and she said, but let's make it statewide. So I did with the first book, and after that, all the books have covered the entire state.
And now you've branched out into another state, too, right?
Yes, I just had released Haunted West Virginia, and it was a real joy to write. I enjoyed it a lot. There's a lot of very cool ghost stories and monster stories in West Virginia. And hopefully next year we'll get to visit North Carolina and do the same there.
Oh, great. Now, that's just the Haunted West Virginia is a spinoff from the Haunted Pennsylvania that you and I did together, right?
Yes, it is. It's the same series, yes.
Yeah, and that's published by Stackpole, who was my original publisher back in 1991 when I did 35 Days to Gettysburg and Saber and Scapegoat and that type of thing. And it was interesting because they approached me a couple of years ago and said that they were doing this series and they wanted me to do Haunted Pennsylvania, and I said, well, can I bring in a co-author? And they said, certainly, because they had others that had co-authored. And you were the first one that came to mind because I don't know anybody who knows more Pennsylvania ghost stories than you, Patty.
Well, I have to tell you, I appreciate that, and I was really honored whenever you had asked me because you happen to be a person that I respect and admire immensely. So it was an honor to be asked, and then doing the work with you was a pleasure. I've never had a project flow together better. we just seemed to work it out and stick to it, and it just fell together beautifully. And the books seem to be selling, well. So I guess everybody can, pick up on the vibe that we had a great time doing it.
Yeah, and the interesting part is, and I don't know if Laine knows this or not, but we the first printing of Haunted Pennsylvania sold out in the first 2 weeks it was out. So they went to a second. Yeah, they went to a second printing. And when I went up to pick up some books, I wanted 2 cases for the 4th of July weekend, and they said, sorry, we can only give you 1 because the second printing's all sold out. So they were printing into the third printing in just a relatively short amount of time. So
wonderful. Well, I'm glad I got mine in time. I enjoyed reading
right.
so much.
But they'll be coming out with more. They're not going to go out of print, I'm sure. And then Patty, we might as well go ahead and announce what the other project that we're doing together. So why don't you go ahead and do that?
Sure. After Haunted Pennsylvania's initial sellout, Stackpole came to us and asked us, as you know, to do another book, and we decided to do this wonderful book that's a collection of ghost stories throughout the history of Pennsylvania. So you have 250, 270 years worth of ghost stories, and tentatively, I think they were calling it the Big Book of Pennsylvania Ghost Stories. It's going to be a hardcover anthology, an exhaustive collection, and I don't know about you, but I'm going to have as much fun with this as we had with the last one. Again, for me, it's flowing beautifully, and I just have the ultimate faith that it'll come together just as well.
Now, there's another aspect here, Patty, that I don't think a lot of people realize, and that's the part of that you're into natural foods, and you have a store there. Could you tell us about that?
Sure. I run Allegheny Mountains General Store in Bedford, Pennsylvania, and it's all organic supplements and organic foods, everything from snack foods for your kids to organic soda, if you can imagine that, and everything you possibly could need for your family.
I'm amazed. Excuse me, Mark.
No, go ahead.
Patty, you have a full-time job, you have kids, and you are cranking out the books. And they're wonderfully written. And how do you do it all?
Well, I have very good friends like Mark, who has encouraged me immensely. When I said I have a lot of respect for Mark, it's true. The very first book signing I ever did was at Mark's, and he was the consummate gentleman and host, and I just thought, man, someday I want to be able to be just like him. And to be honest with you, Mark has opened doors, and he has been a great friend and a great cheerleader on bad days, and I appreciate that more than I'll ever be able to tell him. But I also have Scott, who, here on a day-to-day basis will tell me whenever something's really good or really bad, and he helps. And I've got 3 sons, and my youngest 2 still live at home, and they help out a great deal. So it's not a one-man show in any respect. They all pitch in and help and make it possible. And I just love ghost stories, so they come easily.
And it's interesting, Patty, because you do have to have those people who tell you when something's bad. You can't just have yes men around you. You have to take the bad news too, because it helps you improve. And so it's always good to have those people around you too.
That's when you know you have a true friend, when they'll sit you down and say, honey, I love you a lot and you're a good writer, but that one's really bad. I've had those moments. Everybody gets them.
Now, Scott, is that your role?
Yeah, I have to break the bad news on occasion. It's like, Patty, I know for you it's a wonderful story, but that's just not going to cut it.
That's funny.
Patty, when we were talking, when we were up at Ghost World a couple weeks ago, you were telling me this amazing story about this ghost that was a captain in this old house that was an antique store.
Yes, years ago, there was a lady who came to me and told me this wonderful story about an experience she had with the paranormal. Now, most people think of ghost stories, they think of scary stories, but that's not what happens in real life. Some people become very attached to their ghosts, and some ghosts become very attached to the people in their homes as well. And this lady had been in a position in her life where everything was changing. She is facing a divorce. She had found out her husband was cheating on her, and for her it was a epiphany. It was the change of her life. Her children were grown up, and she had no home and no skills and no anything. And she came across this old house in Bedford County that needed some repairs, and she made a deal with the owner of the house that she would fix the house up in lieu of rent. And so she decided to do just that. But she also needed an income, so she quickly fixed the first floor up and turned it into a secondhand store with antiques and secondhand things, all the way from jewelry to clothing and anything like that. And in the very beginning, she realized that the house was haunted, and she had experiences like she would go downstairs to talk to a customer and come back upstairs, and the paint brush would be laying in the paint can with a handle down in it, and stuff like this. And one night, the ghost had played a prank on her, and exhausted as she was, she just lost it. She went out in the middle of the hallway, and she just told him, "Now look, I know you're here. I don't know who you are, but I have nowhere else to go. So you and I are either going to get along or we're not, but I'm not leaving, and apparently you're not either, so deal with it." And she said after that it was very quiet, and she went along for several weeks fine, and then one day she decided to clean out some of the attic, and when she did, she found an old portrait of a man, looked like a nautical gentleman, and over the course of several weeks of talking to neighbors and stuff, she pieced together that this gentleman had been a native of Bedford who had gone away and became a sea captain, and as a retired gentleman came back and built this particular house. He had been lived in it until he passed away, and then it had been sold. And it had been sold many, many times throughout the years. This gentleman had lived there in the early 1800s or late 1700s, and she took the picture and she hung it up in the hallway. She thought it deserved to be hung up. Well, she had little experiences. A neighbor would come over, or a girlfriend, and they would talk about smelling pipe smoke, and she would laugh and say, "Oh, that's just a captain." She had a friend come over one day with a grandson who was 5 years old, who kept asking about the guy, and nobody talking to the guy. And they all thought he was just being silly until they went to leave, and when they went out into the hallway, the little boy ran up to the picture and pointed at it and said, "Grandma, there's the guy from the living room." And it was the captain. Well, the woman got used to living with her ghost, if you will, but what she wanted to tell me was that this ghost probably saved her life at least twice, maybe 3 times. The first experience was she was in the secondhand store on the first floor, and it was late in the afternoon. She was getting ready to shut down. A gentleman had been in there, a young man, and he just gave her a creepy feeling, and he wouldn't leave. She kept saying, "I have to go. We need to shut down now. You need to go." And he said, "Well, let me try these clothes on." And what ended up happening is he called her back to the back area where the dressing room was, ostensibly because he needed help with something, and then he physically grabbed her as though he were going to attack and rape her. And all of a sudden, the man's face changed. She smelled this pipe smoke, and the man literally grabbed his pants from around his ankles and took off running. And she said, "I turned around, and just for a second, I thought I saw the shadow of the captain, and then he was gone." Another time, she was getting robbed by some gentlemen, migrant workers, who had come into the store late in the afternoon. And again, she smelled the pipe smoke, and she said the man's face just changed as though he had seen a ghost, literally. And she said, "I turned around this time. I was too slow. I didn't see the captain, but I smelled the pipe smoke, and I just remember locking the door and sobbing on the floor saying, 'Oh, thank you so much for being there.'" And then she credits him with yet one more time possibly saving her life. Her husband had come back to her and begged for a second chance. She was going to give it to him. And this was right before she was ready to leave and move out of the house. One night about 3 o'clock in the morning, the telephone rang, and she answered it. And on the phone, she could hear her husband talking to another woman. He was making a date with this woman. And she said, "I have no idea how it happened that I was literally screaming in the phone, and they could not hear me, but I could hear them both." And she said, "I smelled the smoke that night, too, and I thought, somehow the captain has let me hear this conversation, so I'll know that I can't leave here now. It's not right because this man's going to hurt me again." And she stayed there for about 10 years, and then she said her goodbyes to the captain and moved on with her life.
Oh, my goodness. That's incredible.
That's a great story, and I love it because it's a loving and touching story about spirits, and it's not frightening. It's comforting, even.
It is very comforting, and I've come through the years, and I'm sure Mark will tell you the same thing, to realize that people are not in real life nearly as frightened of ghosts as they are on TV.
Right. Well, I was watching something on TV the other day when they were talking about UFOs, and they said, the UFOs and the aliens that come down and kill people and destroy cities, those are only on TV or in the movie theaters.
Right.
You know what I mean? Historically,
it's the same. It's the same with hauntings. I've run into maybe one rude ghost, and I will say that people are what they were in life, and so if there's an irascible, rude person, you're going to run into that once in a while. But evil, throwing people against walls, stuff like that, it doesn't happen as a rule. No. I wanted to also ask you about a couple of other things here, and Scott, you can jump in on any of this stuff. But a couple of years ago, you invited me and Carol to come to Royer Mansion, and it was actually really a wonderful day that we spent there. And one of the neat parts was that at night, then we sat in the mansion, and Patty and I did kind of it was like a ping pong game with ghost stories. We just played off each other and spent an hour and a half telling stories back and forth to a packed house. It was a lot of fun. But you guys do a fundraiser for Royer Mansion every year, and do basically all the money goes to the mansion to restore it. But tell me the story about the gray man, the gray creature. Oh, the red-eyed monster, the gray monster of Ormenia.
That scared the heck out of me.
Well, actually, this is a story that came out of my childhood. Ormenia is only about 3 miles as the crow flies from the Royer house. And when I was a teenage girl, I was staying with a family that lived at the end of the road up there called the Shortcut, or Ridge Road.
Now,
and
I'm sorry to interrupt you. This is in Pennsylvania.
Yes, in Pennsylvania, central Pennsylvania, in Blair County. And one evening I was sitting there talking to one of the members of the family, and I said about let's go for a walk down the Ridge Road. And he was a teenage boy, but he looked like he was scared to death. He's like, oh, my God, no, we're not going. There's no way. And he told me this amazing story that I thought was really him pulling my leg. He told me that 2 years earlier, this would have been when he was about 13, he was supposed to be feeding the dogs for his father one night. They had a bunch of coon hounds and what have you over across the road by the edge of the Ridge Road. And his dad found out that he hadn't fed them, kids being what they are. So he got him up and he told him, he said, go on out there and feed those dogs now. Well, as my friend was outside getting ready to feed the dogs, all of a sudden all the dogs that were barking and excited about getting fed suddenly just got very quiet and went back into their boxes, all but a great big German Shepherd. And the German Shepherd was barking and growling and looking directly behind my friend at the edge of the woods and an area which was lit by a pole light. And when my friend turned around, he said he saw a approximately 7 foot long humanoid person, if you will. His arms were really long, almost down to his knees. His body looked just like gray skin pulled over a skeleton, and his eyes were kind of red in this skeleton's mask head of his, and it was watching my friend. As soon as it realized that my friend saw it, it turned around and went back into the woods. Well, he screamed and ran like anybody would and got over to the house, and he told his parents about the monster, and he thought they wouldn't believe him, but instead they just basically sat him down and said, yeah, we know you're telling the truth because years ago when you were a baby, your father was hunting in the woods over there on the Ridge Road, and he saw it too.
Wow.
Since then, I have had probably a dozen people come to me with their stories of sightings or hearing the monster, because the monster gives out a horrible scream, almost an unearthly scream is how it's described. And on both sides of the Ridge Road, they're now building houses. And people are coming to me, when I go to the Royer house in particular, and confiding to me that they've heard it or they've seen something or something along those lines. So, and Scott had his own experience.
Well, yeah, you get... Anyway, Patty was doing the story of this, and she wanted some background shots. So it's like, all right, I'll go with you. I'll take the camera. We'll take some background pictures. The picture of the sign. It was early, misty morning. Had the fog hanging there. It was a real nice effect for photography. So as we're as we're taking pictures, the pavement stops at this abrupt turnaround, and then it becomes dirt track. So I was walking down there, thought, okay, some nice long shots down this road will work. And as I get about 200 yards past where Patty had parked, I hear this thrashing and thumping in the woods, and it's extremely thick. You can't see more than a few feet off the side of the road, and it's posted on both sides. And I hear what sounds like sticks being smacked together. Well, I wasn't armed at the time, and I'm thinking, okay, there's something in there making a lot of noise. Now, whatever it is, it's got some strength because these are loud. So I made a little abrupt retreat back to Patty's car and said, "There's something down there." And she wondered why I was moving quite rapidly back in her direction. And so I got back in the tracker, and I was sitting on the hood, and as we're driving down the road, I'm looking. I did find an impression in the center of the road. Only one, and it looked like a footprint. In the rough gravel, it was hard to tell, but that was my experience with the monster.
Well, that also brings up another point. I mean, when you said it sounded like sticks being banged together. That would indicate something with that would be able to grip a stick, something with opposable thumbs, something
exactly.
like an ape or a humanoid type of creature. Not, and I don't think apes are indigenous to that area of Pennsylvania.
No, and we actually found two places where there were saplings snapped off, and this is on a hill, and it looked like whatever it was had been holding on to them and leaning down the hill into berry briars there and picking. And we found another place where there were smaller saplings that were broken and twisted to make a nest at the edge of the road, and it was clearly, depressed, and whatever it was had broken and bent the wood to have something, and the sticks to have something to lay on.
I mean, my grandfather had me in the woods in Pennsylvania since I was 5 years old, so it is nothing. I've never seen anything like that or heard anything like it. Certainly not a bear, certainly not a deer, nothing that is native that I know of to Pennsylvania.
And we did get pictures of all of this, believe it or not.
Wow, and time again you heard first-hand accounts from people, not just stories passed down.
Yes, so these are first-hand accounts from people who actually have heard it or witnessed it. I think about 2 years ago I was at Royer, and a little girl about 15 years old, she came over to me and she kind of whispered, "Could I talk to you when you have a moment?" And as Mark said, we do charity work there, and that year I think we were doing Victorian seances and all the profits going to the house to keep it up. And I made a moment for her, and she said, "I don't want to sound crazy, but my dad and I live up on the edge of the Ridge Road, and, well, we've heard this thing screaming 2 or 3 times." And she made a point of telling me that she and her father had gone onto the Internet and listened for their first thought being a mountain lion possibly, and it was not a mountain lion. And then they listened to the cries of a bear and of different other animals, and she looked at me funny and she said the closest we ever got is when we heard something called the Ohio Bigfoot screams. And I knew exactly what she was talking about, and I said yes, and she said that's what it sounded like.
Wow.
And yet the descriptions are not of a Bigfoot. I mean, there have been Bigfoot sightings in Pennsylvania, but what you described is a completely different creature.
Yes, it is. And I have to say it is not unprecedented, however. In the Hudson Valley in the late 1800s, there is a story that was written by ghost hunter extraordinaire Elliot O'Donnell, who was very famous in his day. And he wrote of a similar creature. The physical description and the sound of its cry and a lot of other interesting aspects about it being almost identical. And in South America, I have come across areas of the jungles where they talk about a creature that they believe is a spirit that comes out of the earth. But this creature is seen and heard, and its physical description is the same as the Ridge Road monster.
Wasn't there also some accounts of this creature kind of disappearing into the earth, like into a sinkhole or something?
Yes, when my friend sat down and his parents told him about his father's sighting, what had happened was years ago in the early 1960s, his dad had gone hunting on the Ridge Road, first day of buck season, which is, I believe, the first day of November or something like that. And it had been a really quiet, cold, miserable day. There was nothing moving on that mountainside at all. So by dusk, he had to give up, and he started out of there. And it got dark a little early on the ridge road because you have all that heavy cover. Even with the leaves off, it still gets dark a little bit earlier than it does elsewhere. So he's walking down the ridge road headed for home, and he sees what he thinks is a hunter in front of him. Early 1960s, hunters didn't have to wear camouflage. So, he just thought it was a guy moving in front of him, must be a hunter. Till they got to an open area where he caught sight of the man, and that's when he saw the tall gray creature. At that point, it seemed to become aware of him as well, and it turned and looked at him. That's when he saw the eyes. And he said then the creature just simply stepped off the road into one of the sinkholes, and this whole area is pockmarked with sinkholes. And it lifted its head up and gave this horrible cry and then just started sinking down into the earth, which is identical to the story that Elliot O'Donnell told from the 1800s in the Hudson Valley.
Wow. Well, what is a sinkhole? I mean, I'm kind of new to the area, and it sounds like...
A sinkhole is sort of like an area that you have some underground streams and underground water, and at some point it becomes saturated enough it will just slowly drop down. In some cases it's a collapse. You'll have them, they can be as deep as 30, 40 feet when they drop in.
Wow, is that
sometimes
common?
Maybe a little crevice at the bottom of them. If it's natural. Pennsylvania is lined with caves and caverns, especially in the mountains in central Pennsylvania. And it's just it's a natural phenomena. You'll see them if you travel the woods of Pennsylvania. You'll come across them all the time.
Now, how far is this from the Hudson Valley where the other sighting was?
Oh, you're looking from New York State to central Pennsylvania about, 5 hours? 6 hours?
5, yeah.
Driving time. Walking time, it would be several days.
In other words, not the same creature.
Right,
Certainly not the same creature, no.
Well, in the meantime, it was really weird because I heard that story, and Carol and I had to drive from the Royer Mansion that evening to Williamsburg, Pennsylvania, which is a few miles up the road. And as we're driving along, all of a sudden we pass Ridge Road. Oh, no. So I got a little
no, what were you in for, did you?
Yeah, those tingles in the back of your neck. Yeah, so that was interesting. But now there's something someplace else that, in fact, we have investigated it. You have investigated a lot more than I have. But Carol and I went to the Jean Bonnet with you guys, and there's some great stories there too.
As a matter of fact, the Jean Bonnet Tavern is how I actually got started in the first place, a long time ago.
And where is the Jean Bonnet?
It's just outside of Bedford, just a few miles west on Route 30 from Bedford.
You can see it from the turnpike, right?
From anywhere, past Bedford heading towards Pittsburgh, you'll see it. Big old stone building. History goes back almost 300 years. The records show that there was an abandoned French fort there somewhere around 1719. So then it was added on the upper floors, and you can see how it was constructed in several different periods because of the way the fireplaces are lined up. But what got me started, a friend of mine, he's a doctor in Philadelphia. He and his sister rented one of the suites there, and they were staying, and they said, "Hey, you want to come down? It's supposed to be haunted." Well, I had a passing interest in ghosts and hauntings. I was more into history at the time, and so I said, "Sure, no problem." And I went down there, knew it was supposed to be haunted, so I took a thermometer, took my camera, supposedly looked for cold spots. I got some pictures, a couple of pictures I couldn't explain. One of them I took to a friend of mine who was a photographer, and he said there's no logical explanation for that. It showed a column of light in the middle of the dining room, and this column cast a shadow on my friend's back from the light across the room, so it had to be matter at the time. And I didn't know what to do with it, so I dropped a copy off to Melissa, the owner, and I thought that was it. It was very interesting. Felt some cold on the stairs when I was sitting there at 3 in the morning. And it turns out a couple of weeks later, I get a call from Patty, and she had stopped by, and Melissa showed her the picture, and Patty tracked me down, and she said she was starting a group. Would I be interested in doing some investigations? And I got hooked.
But the Jean Bonnet has so many cool ghost stories. There was a story that was always called a legend, and historians scoffed at it for many years. According to the legend, if you will, Commander Forbes, who was commander at Fort Bedford at the time, was ordered to meet George Washington as they went westward to try to liberate Fort Pitt, which was then being called Fort Duquesne by the French. And he stopped outside of the Jean Bonnet area, I'm not sure if it's because he was ill or if it was because he was waiting for more soldiers. Really, nobody knows. There's no historical record for that. But he did record that they paused for several days there. At that time, just the basement area existed, which was the abandoned French fort. And he had troops in what are now the fields around the tavern. And he noticed that there was this wagon master, they called him Teamsters, that's where the term came from, who was asking an awful lot of pointed questions. Well, you could make a lot of money if you were a wagon master, and you could find out where the enemy was going to have to encounter you, because they could sell the British information to the French and the French information to the British, and they were really the only people on the road full time. So both countries were paying for information from wagon masters. And it made Forbes suspicious. So Forbes called the man in, had his officers bring him in late one night under the cover of darkness, and I will leave it to your imagination how they elicited the confession, but the man did confess that he was spying for the French. He was tried, sentenced to be executed for treason, hung, and then buried in the basement, in that flooring, that dirt floor, of what is now the Jean Bonnet. That was the legend. And historians laughed at it until about 1958, when the Earnhardts purchased the property and decided they wanted to turn the basement into a tavern. They had to dig the floor down a few feet, and when they did, they came across the skeletal remains of a male dating from the mid-1700s, and the male died by a broken neck.
Oh, wow. So there's the archaeological evidence for the historical legend.
And he supposedly is one of the ghosts who haunts the building. He haunts the first floor. There's a horse thief who was hung in the building when it was a courthouse during the days whenever they had circuit courts, and he haunts the second floor. There were 6 horse thieves that were known to have been hung at one time together in a group outside of the building, and when they were unearthing, doing some work in the field nearby, they unearthed the bodies years ago. There was also a lady who was the mistress of the first British owner, Robert Callender, who died there waiting for him to make an honest woman of her. She didn't have the faintest idea that Callender was already a married man and never intended to marry her. And she's been seen in the building and heard in the building for many years. So there's literally a half dozen or more ghosts that are occasionally encountered in that building.
Great place. It's a fabulous historical site, and and I'm not very sensitive, as you guys all know, but that was one place where I actually got a whiff of strange perfume. I mean, I hadn't smelled anything, kind of a spicy perfume. I hadn't smelled anything. Nobody in our group was wearing anything, but I actually smelled something. As we know, it's all the senses are involved when it comes to paranormal events, and I guess maybe I haven't seen anything, I hardly hear anything, and all of a sudden I started smelling something that wasn't really there. So I guess that may have been a paranormal event. What do you think?
You actually were in the second and third floors when they were empty, so there wouldn't have been anybody just going by ahead of you or anything.
Right. Now, there's one place that Carol and I, one of these days, we're going to try and go there with you, but I know you've been invited down there a number of times, and it's almost an official state-sanctioned investigation down in North Carolina. I mean, it's about as close as I've ever heard anybody get to actually having, a government entity request or at least even allow them to do a ghost investigation. Would you guys like to talk about that?
It's the Capitol building in Raleigh. The second and third floors have been restored to their Civil War appearance. It was finished in 1840, and literally the upper 2 floors have not changed at all, and it remained in use until 1961, I believe, when they finally moved out to a newer building, except for the governor, who still maintains his office on the first floor there. Patty and I were lucky enough. We were invited down to the Rhine Research Center several years ago to actually go and talk about how one does an investigation in the field. Rhine does their work in a laboratory, which, well, you can't bring a ghost to your laboratory. You have to go to where they've been seen at. And we're given a list. We were the first ones to go down, so we had the pick of sites to go. And, of course, I love history, and I saw that the Capitol building was on the list. I said, oh, my, we have to go here. It's inside. We don't have to worry about weather. look at this place. It's gorgeous. It was finished in 1840, and that's the one that we picked. And when we went in, we met the Capitol historian at the time, and he is still running the Capitol, Mr. Ray Beck, and Raymond was just fantastic. Showed us every courtesy, and he was very interested. And even after we left there the first time, he said, I would like you to come back and do this, a more intensive investigation. And we have been back every year but one, when unfortunately circumstances we couldn't get down there. But I'm just enthralled with the building and the hospitality we're shown every time we go down there.
And what kind of results did you get when you were down there? I know you showed me a picture that's pretty astounding.
Well, I think it was our first year we've had some EVP and stuff like that. We've had a gentleman in our group capture an EVP of a Southern man, supposedly a soldier, saying that we're around here. This backstory on that is that this gentleman, his name's Steve Kemrood, he was a member of our group, and he had a bit of asthma. So when he goes to a site, he usually finds a place and sits. Otherwise, he sits and wheezes a lot. And he was from the South originally, so Steve has a bit of Southern sympathies, if you will. So he walked upstairs to this room that's supposed to be haunted by a soldier, and he sat down in a chair, and you hear him say, well, they tell me there's supposed to be somebody up here. Better not be one of them damn Yankees. And a couple seconds later, in a very deep Southern voice, you hear a Southern man say, we're around here. And then about 3 years ago, the picture actually happened, and what happened that night was that we were working. Sensors were going off in the building that were supposed to have already been turned off, and they returned them off repeatedly, and they kept turning themselves back on, and the security staff were just driving themselves crazy because they couldn't figure this out. And I was sitting at a monitor when Ray Beck and Scott and another member of our group named John were walking through the building because we were now getting sensors telling us that there was a possible fire in the structure. And there's nothing that's the most horrible nightmare in the world to think that you're in the state capitol building of North Carolina and you're going to be remembered as the ghost hunter that burned the building down.
Oh, my goodness.
So we're scared to death. I mean, we really want to make sure there's nothing going on. People were reporting the smell of smoke, and so they decided to put everybody on the first floor and allow just Scott and Ray and John to walk the building. The director of historic sites at the time and myself sat at this monitor and were watching them go room from room. Suddenly we realized that in the chamber there was somebody moving, and yet we could clearly see on the monitor that the only people who should have been in that building were on the next floor up. So we radio into them and say, hey guys, did you guys leave somebody behind on the second floor? We're seeing somebody in the Senate chamber. And they said, no, of course not. They went right back down and double-checked, and there was nobody there. But we both clearly saw this person moving through the room in the dark. So we contacted the Capitol Police the next day, and with the help of Ray Beck, and they agreed to look at the footage for us and see what they came up with. And they came up with a very clear infrared shot of a figure, of a mass sitting in what is known as one of the haunted seats in the Senate chamber.
Oh, wow. Yeah, I've seen that photograph, and it's pretty impressive. I mean, there's something there. You cannot deny it. You look at that and you say there's there's a form sitting in that seat, and that's just astounding.
It was really cool because, this was not our film. This wasn't something we got out of there. It was something that the Capitol Police contacted us a month or two later and said, hey, we went through this frame by frame, and this is what we found.
Oh, that's great. Now, is this on your website now?
If you want it, it's www.ghostsrus.com.
Great.
It's like Toys R Us, except we're ghosts, not toys.
Great. Another thing I want to get into on this podcast is some of the stuff that Scott's been doing with EVP. I've been able to get EVP fairly frequently. What I haven't been able to do is always get Class A EVP. Usually it's Class B or Class C, occasionally Class A, which is the best. You can understand the words. But what Scott has been able to do is download my EVP, even the worst ones, onto a computer. He has a technique of using programs on a computer, and he can clear it up. I think one of the most amazing ones was the one that we got. It wasn't even me. It was somebody else who just inadvertently got some EVP at the Mountain View Hotel. And Scott cleared it up so that you could, right there in front of everybody, so that you could hear a voice say, "My name is Jill." That's just remarkable. Scott, could you talk a little bit about how you do that?
I use several different programs. The one I use most is Acoustica. It's very user-friendly. You can clean up the background noise. You can slow down your recording. You can boost the overall volume level, the gains in it. You can see the spectrogram. Unfortunately, you can't see the spectrogram as it's being played. Cool Edit Pro works for that. We have another one called Speech Filing System, which is very good for detailed work. And there's not really one out there that is great for everything, but there's several of them that have their own little niche. That one of the ones I'm using now is called Windows Spectrograph, and it's great because we are now getting close to real-time EVP.
That was the other thing I wanted to ask you about, because we actually experimented with that at in the Ghost House, what we call the Ghost House, our headquarters for the Ghosts of Gettysburg walking tours. And you remember that night, and you actually, that was amazing. Could you go ahead and tell us about that?
Well, we were sitting there, and then we were trying to do the EVP sessions, and what it is with the microphone when you have it hooked into a recorder and into the laptop with the program running and headphones on, even though the ear can't hear it, sometimes you can hear the live feed through the mic into the earphones, and you can actually see the pattern as it's being done live in the spectrogram. Of course, you have to have it recorded because Windows will not record it. It just simply you view it. But the questions were amazing because we're trying to figure out, of course you know the exact history of the building, and we're trying to figure out where they're from. And then I switch into a southern accent. I said, "Where you all from?" And then we got an amazing answer. We got a Georgia and then a Yip. Seemed to be two different voices.
That was great. And the interesting thing is that we actually saw the blip on the screen when that was recorded.
Were you hearing it come through the microphone?
I didn't hear it come through at that time. I did see it. So far, theoretically, yes, with this system, two-way communication would be possible. Theoretically. It hasn't happened yet. I have seen it. It worked at the Ghost House. And ironically, at the Jean Bonnet Tavern, Melissa allowed me there several mornings before they had opened to go up and experiment. And I was able to see responses that occurred, but I did not hear it yet. But then again, this is new, and we're still playing with it. So I'm holding out hope that at some point we'll be able to hear the response as it occurs, and then phrase the next question based upon that response. Our technology is exponentiating, and we're getting further and further ahead. Sooner or later, we're going to stumble upon the answer. The real-time EVP, it's looking good. It's not like sitting down and having a conversation yet, but it's giving some indicators that with some more work, maybe some filters, something, just some more experimentation. Who knows what's gonna happen with that? That photography is now starting to. More people are using the infrared techniques, and I'm seeing some results out there with that.
Which is what I want to talk about next. Because in my new book, it's called Fredericksburg and Chancellorsville, a Ghost Hunter's Field Guide to Civil War Sites. Scott was kind enough to actually write a couple of pages, which we are going to print verbatim in the book. And basically what he's done is develop a technique to photograph spirit entities in the daylight. Now, this to me is fascinating because, everybody always wants to go out at night. They think the only time they can do ghost hunting is at night and get pictures is at night. Well, the problem is that, of course, the National Park Service at Gettysburg kind of put the clamps on being able to go out there in the evening. Of course, the park closes at 10 o'clock. Most parks do. So what Scott's done is developed. Actually, I should let him tell this because I think it happened because he got mad. So go ahead.
It did. It did. That's how it came about. It really started because I love Gettysburg. My great-great-grandfather was there, and during the summer it closes at 10 o'clock. So there's not a lot of darkness there to play with. And now off-season, I believe it closes at 7. So you're really not getting any time out. that you can spend in the field. So I thought, okay, if they can take the darkness away, how can I take the sun away? Is kind of what I was thinking.
Right.
And we've always gotten the theory that these entities somehow manifest in the infrared because of the night shot cameras. They seem to catch balls of light. The digitals were sensitive to these balls of energy, and I thought, all right, how do we get rid of the energy, the light that we can see, and just filter that out? I thought, well, okay, how do I do this? The answer was I simply took the digital camera and put an infrared filter on it, secured it, and then I just changed my ISO speed and turned the flash off. The downside of this is you have a half-second to a 1-second exposure on a bright day, so you have to use a tripod. You need to take several shots of the same exact frame without moving the camera, and then when you download them, you can see if there's anything there. I was shocked. The first time I really started playing with it was in Gettysburg, seriously, and I came out with a picture I couldn't believe. It showed what appears to be two apparitions at Devil's Den, and Mark, you saw that, and
that's incredible.
And the uniform looks to be what it should be for a Confederate, almost with the short cape. Probably the best photograph I've ever seen in my life. A member of our group, Craig Rupp, came up with it. He was on top of a little round top, and Mark, you saw that one, and I'd love to hear your opinion. That, and then the follow-up shots that we took with what the ground looks like now.
Well, the one of that Craig took on Little Round Top, I know that area like the back of my hand, and it was just, the position of the man, and I'm calling it a man, but it's actually a spirit that he got a photograph of, is such that he is in the position that the ground was in 1863. They've changed it. They paved a lot of it now, and so the ground isn't exactly the way it was. Okay, but this is like that famous ghost story in England of the Roman legion marching through, but you can only see from the knees up because the original road was a foot below them.
Wow.
That's exactly what happened in this photograph. He is standing on the original ground. And the other thing is that it is you can sort of see through the figure, but you can't, if you know what I mean. It's the most solid looking apparitional photo that I've ever seen, and it's really astounding. So this technique that Scott has developed is groundbreaking. I've always said 45% of my stories, the 1,000 stories that I've collected, happen in the daytime. So there's no need to go out at night. Ghosts are there all times, day or night. And so what Scott's done is he's developed a technique where we can actually do some investigations in the daylight, which is good for a lot of people. A lot of people can't, you just can't always go out at night. You have to sometimes do your investigating when you can. So I think it's a fantastic thing. I can't wait to see where this is headed.
Now, Scott, you have some great pictures on your website, and one of the Jimbine Tavern that we were just talking about. Was this picture of a ghost on your website taken with this type of photography?
Yeah, this was when I first started technique last year. Just about the same time I took the shot at Devil's Den. Patty and I had stopped down at Jimbine Tavern, and I took the camera, was setting it up there. Unfortunately, I should have set up on the other side of the guardrail from Route 30, but oh well, I didn't get hit, so it was a close one. But anyway, and I took some pictures of the outside, and whenever I downloaded them, started looking at them, you can see what appears to be a woman in a mop cap looking out the window, looking east, which would be the direction she'd look for Calendar, if it is the mistress. Now, where she is standing, appears to be standing, there is actually a table bolted to the wall right there. It is a booth, and that is where the table is bolted below the window. So there is actually no physical way someone could stand in that window right now, at least not today. And Patty was standing right inside there when I took it, and there was very few people in the tavern at the time. It was just after lunch, so it was fairly empty, and there was no one there. And Patty verified that when I came in, and after I downloaded it, I said, whoa, look at this. And Patty, your impression?
Well, they had just been doing renovations, which might have played a little bit into this. They had torn apart the entire second floor and restructured everything and repainted and papered and put in all new fixtures, all new tables and everything. And they had probably only had those tables bolted in there for about 2 weeks at that point. So and there were certainly no people in mob caps and shawls walking about the building, and certainly nobody who was able to walk through a solid wood table to stand there and look out. So it was a very interesting photograph because I was there when it was taken.
These are all great photographs on GhostOrUs.com. Devil's Den, the Railroaders Memorial Museum at Altoona. These are great.
Literally, especially Craig's, it is like the Hollywood version of a ghost that you can see through.
Right.
Right.
I mean, that's as close as an explanation I see, except for the fact is it's not Hollywood, it's actually real.
Right.
And Craig was kind enough to keep the photos in his camera, and I was able to download the original, so all the EXIF information is on there, so I know that it has not been altered in any way. And there's just no way with the length of exposure of that picture, there's no one someone could have jumped in there and jumped out while he was taking the shot. I mean, I would love to see someone that could come up with a rational explanation of how that could be faked.
Yeah, no, like I said, I know that area as well as anybody, and it's just it's impossible. Now, we had some exciting things going on. In fact, all of us, just in the end of May, we all were involved in a shoot by a production company for the Travel Channel, and we had some interesting things happen to us. And I don't know, Patty, do you want to talk about some of the interesting things that happened to you, for example, at the Daniel Lady Farm?
Patty, I know that Carol was saying how you were able to confirm some of the spirits I was talking to the night before without knowing anything about who they were, and I loved hearing that. Yeah,
anybody who's sensitive, I think our biggest fear happens to be the fact that, I don't know about you, but for me, I always worry about, am I letting my imagination get away with me? So when you have somebody else able to come in and confirm, it's really nice. It's validating for you. But you had been there with Mark, and I believe you crossed a gentleman over. And the person I ended up speaking with was, I believe, a friend of his who had been waiting for him, and he wanted to say thank you to Mark.
Right.
And so he waited. He did what he wanted to do. I, helped facilitate it. And he moved on. And then while I was waiting, while Mark and Scott were shooting a segment, I was sitting in the central staircase and had an interesting experience with a farmhand who came in. He was coming up from the basement. He informed me he wasn't allowed to come in the front door. But I was trying to take notes and get all of the information down as I was trying to learn a little bit about him. And later on, when we looked at the handwriting on it, it was very odd because it starts out as my handwriting and ends up as somebody else's. Yeah, I found that quite different. I hadn't had that happen before, but the handwriting and the spelling and everything sort of changed about halfway through the sheet.
Interesting. Now, had he been German, did I remember you saying? Or was that another? He
said he was a German immigrant and that he worked on the farm. He had family that lived, I guess, on another farm nearby, and he had taken work there. He didn't talk about the Civil War. I don't think he was from that era at all, but he was very concerned about getting the floors dirty. Apparently the lady of the house didn't care for that. And she had rules apparently about not allowing him in the front door. He could come up from the basement or he could come in the back door, but he was not allowed to come or go by their front door.
Interesting. And it's still that way. We have to take our shoes off or put on socks over our shoes.
At the lady, well, they just that's part of the Gettysburg Battlefield Preservation Association, and they purchased it a number of years ago, and now they're restoring it to its original appearance at the time of the battle. One of the things they did before we did the shoot is they just refinished the floors for about $10,000. And, of course, one of the things that they didn't do was remove the blood stains that are still in the building on those wooden floors, and those are quite remarkable.
Well, the first time you walked Laine and I through that building. I went through first, and then Laine went through afterward. And I think I feel safe saying that we were both blown over by the amount of energy that was there. It was an extremely intense place, particularly the living room area. And not only is the blood still there, but there's an awful lot of energy from those people and some of the people too.
And you know, when we went to Ghost World Conference in Gettysburg a few weeks ago, Mark and I went out with Maureen of the Ghost Chronicles before the investigation that night.
Mm-hmm.
And it was nice for me because I could become a little bit more acclimated, so I didn't have to walk into feeling what I did that day, all the energy that we felt. But Maureen is a physical medium, and a spirit actually entered her body and was talking through her. And that was something that I have never experienced before.
Well, I have always said that I don't ever want to see anybody channeling, a channel medium. And
right.
doggone if I didn't walk right into it, and that was creepy. I didn't like that.
Yeah, it was a little difficult getting that person out, but he was in a lot of pain.
So that would be my greatest fear with a channeling medium, is that at some point they would have an entity manifest inside of them that they couldn't get out.
Oh, I know, and I looked at Carol and I said, "What should I do something?" And she said, "You know what's going on." So I there were all these entities, and I kept feeling them trying to get in me, and she was pretty close to me, and I walked over to touch her, and I heard this voice say, "Don't touch her." And it was very loud, and I kind of jumped back, and then I started getting very upset at the spirit and saying, "Get out, you have to leave, you can't do this." And it left pretty quickly.
Well, that's good.
Somebody said that, and I'm not sure if it was you, Laine, but somebody was saying, because I was filming this whole thing, and they were literally watching the entities in the room go into Maureen, go around Laine, and bounce off me. They literally saw this. Was that you, Laine?
It was. I saw them just bouncing off of you. You had this aura of energy around you. And whereas I felt them really trying to get in me, and it was difficult for me to fight them, they were bouncing right off of you, and of Carol as well.
Well, that's okay with me.
Well, that was really interesting. You had this protection around you,
Yeah, I guess. Well, Patty, this is fascinating, and one of the things that I admire about you so much, and I think is great, is that you are probably one of the best ghost storytellers I've ever met. You can really, really spin a yarn. If you could just tell us a couple more of your favorite stories, maybe something out of West Virginia or something out of the haunted Pennsylvania that we're doing. I know that one of your favorite characters is Mad Anthony Wayne, and we have a couple real good stories about him in haunted Pennsylvania. But does anything come to mind that you want to share with us?
Well, I'll tell you the Anthony Wayne story if you don't mind, and then we'll pass on through to maybe something from West Virginia.
That'll be great.
You're right, Anthony Wayne is one of my favorite historical figures. He is interesting in so many levels. He was apparently one of the best statisticians that Washington ever encountered. He is so underrated, historically speaking. He saved Washington's life. He saved Washington's command. He was a fiercely loyal man, willing to take whatever chances, hence the nickname Mad Anthony, but to take whatever chance was necessary in order to win the battle. And he secured the westward movement for Americans, and they have no idea because they don't know about places like Fallen Timber today. But if it wouldn't be for Anthony Wayne's ferocious battle tactics, the West may not have been won quite as soon as it was. And Anthony Wayne has also a paranormal history that is unique and spans a huge part of the Americas. His ghost stories range all the way from Canada to Georgia. But, of course, he was from Pennsylvania, and he spent most of his time in Pennsylvania. And it's only fitting that our wonderful Anthony Wayne would haunt the entire state. Wayne is responsible for creating two other ghosts, if you will, but he himself is said to haunt the state. The story is that, and it's a true story, that Wayne, as an elderly gentleman, went back to Fort Presque on Presque Isle, and he was working there when he passed away. In his last days, he asked that when he died, if he could be buried at the blockhouse. And that's exactly what they did with him. They buried him at the blockhouse. Well, 10 years go by, and his family in southeastern Pennsylvania decide that they want to bring him home now and inter him in the family cemetery. So they send his son, Isaac, who's a young adult, and he thinks that his father should have decomposed by now, so he brings a little casket along that you can strap to the back of a horse. To his absolute horror, his father hasn't decomposed at all. The peat in the area where he was buried has perfectly preserved him. The solution is offered by a physician from Erie, PA, that they should boil the body and separate the bones in the body, and they did. The cauldron where they boiled him actually does exist. It's in the planetarium in Erie. And what happened is they took the bones, put them in the casket, and took the flesh and what have you and put it back in the original grave at the blockhouse. So Wayne has the distinction of being buried in two separate locations in Pennsylvania. His son didn't secure the casket appropriately, and along the way some of the bones bounced out. It wasn't until he was nearly home that he discovered this problem, and it was decided to just let it go and go ahead and inter his father's bones. It is said that on January 1st, which is Anthony Wayne's birthday, Wayne arises and rides from the blockhouse at Erie all the way down to his own second grave in southeastern Pennsylvania, looking for his missing bones. And that's only literally one of about a half dozen ghost stories of Anthony Wayne's.
That is amazing how many stories there are about General Anthony Wayne. I mean, he was a fabulous commander. And the name that he got, Mad Anthony Wayne, is kind of it may seem a little degrading now, but I mean, you know, it was because of his military sagacity that he got that name, which is actually a compliment. But yeah, how about some West Virginia?
Patty, I know you were telling me the other day some great Anthony Wayne stories, and you have so many. Can you tell us what book these are in so our listeners can go and get this book to hear the rest of them?
Well, actually, some of the Anthony Wayne stories are in Haunted Pennsylvania, which Mark and I did, and there will be some of the Anthony Wayne stories. Actually, there's a whole little chapter about Anthony Wayne in the new book that will be coming out, the Big Book of Pennsylvania Ghost Stories. So Wayne is a recurring figure in my life and in my love of history, and certainly he's a recurring figure in the books that we work on.
Great. Well, I can't wait to get the new book and finish reading all these wonderful stories you were telling me.
Patty has also written a book on haunted West Virginia from Stackpole, and I was just wondering if you could share a story or two from West Virginia.
Sure. There's two stories in particular. Again, my passion for history, and particularly colonial and French and Indian history, will come into play, I'm afraid. But one of my favorite stories was a story of a premonition that came true. It was a dream, but it's a story called The Dream of Dave Morgan. And Dave Morgan, during the French and Indian period, took his two teenage children and went to a fort so that they would be safe, because there were a lot of Indian raids going on in their area at the time. And over the course of the winter, the raids slowed down, which just makes sense. If you're having to survive through the cold winters, you're not going to necessarily be equipped to go out and raid. Come spring, most of the farmers in the area decided to try to go home and clean off their farms and start working again, in the hopes that this coming spring they would have a better chance of getting a crop in and staying at home for the summer. Morgan sent his teenage son and his daughter to their house to double-check how everything had fared throughout the winter and to start clearing off the garden. He himself had been ill, and he decided to stay and rest, and he had been assured by the commander at the fort that it was safe to send his teenage children out. So he did so. While he was sleeping, he had this horrible nightmare in which he saw his children at the edge of their garden. They had cleaned it off, and they were standing there talking, and he saw two Indians creeping up on them from behind, and he saw them being killed. it was a dream like he had never had in his entire life. He literally awoke, grabbed his gun, and took off running, and ran and traveled as fast as he could toward the family farm. When he got to the farm, the scene from his dream was playing out. He looked exactly where he had seen the Indians in the dream, and there they stood, just about to attack his children and kill them.
Oh, my.
He screamed and shot out and shot at one of them, and he ended up killing the one, and the other one was wounded and took off after a ferocious battle between him and this man, a wrestling match. And he and his children made it back to the fort into safety. But it was touch and go for them, and certainly he would have lost his children had it not been for this premonition, if you will. And I also think that West Virginia, I love West Virginia because it has so many cool monsters. Of course, we all know about the Mothman, but if you read the book, you're going to read about lake monsters and things of this nature. There's a river monster out on the Ohio River, and it's just so many cool monsters. But my favorite thing were the Thunderbird stories. Thunderbirds are supposedly a mythological creature, but there is actually a whole field of cryptozoology dedicated to real Thunderbirds. And we do know that at one time there were huge birds that, as large as what we consider a Thunderbird, that did live in South America, and possibly through the fossil record we know they have made it as far as in New York, I believe. But people are still seeing them today. And in the 1800s, there's a wonderful series of stories that come from West Virginia about a little rural community, mountain community, where a Thunderbird wreaked havoc on this area for several years. And it starts out with the story of a little girl named Landy, who is about 7 or 8 years old, and she's sent by her mother in the middle of the winter. She's sent to go across to the hillside, the fields, to a neighbor's house to check on this neighbor who had been ill. What happens is Landy doesn't get there. So her father goes out tracing her, and he tracks her to this field where she turns around several times, and then she's just gone. The footprints stop right there, as though something literally picked her up off the earth. And you can imagine their fear and what have you. Well, over the course of the next few months, stories start to surface of this Thunderbird that's been seen. Now, it's not just somebody saying they saw it, but a local sheriff and his adult son were out hunting and came across a Thunderbird attacking a full-grown deer trying to steal her fawn. They witnessed this and chased the Thunderbird off, which literally flies up, taking the fawn with them. And when they get to the doe, they realize why she stopped fighting. It had pecked the doe's eyes out. And this was not something that was hearsay. There was a man who was physically attacked by it and horribly mangled, and he made it to a neighbor's house and collapsed. The neighbor got him to town, and he told the same story of seeing this Thunderbird. And unfortunately, most probably what happened to this little girl, Landy, is that she was taken up into the lair of the Thunderbird and devoured. And it was only one of a series of really very well-documented attacks by not a mythical creature at all, but by a physical entity capable of literally pecking the eyes out of a doe or tearing a man's scalp off.
Now, I have actually heard a similar story about a Thunderbird from a resident of West Virginia, probably near Berkeley Springs, somewhere in that area.
Okay.
And they, it was very similar, but they told it as if it were absolutely the truth, and it wasn't legend, that someone they know had told them.
The fact of the matter is that there seems to be a migratory route. Of course, Pennsylvania has a lot of Thunderbird stories, both in the Black Forest region in the northern part of the state, and in the Philadelphia area there are many historical accounts. But it seems that you can look at a migratory path that these birds seem to take, and it goes straight through West Virginia.
Do the stories you hear typically happen at night? Do they happen during the day?
No, almost always either during the morning hours or the dusk hours or just prior to storms if it's in the day. And there is a prevailing theory in the cryptozoological community that the mythological Thunderbird and all that mythology about it coming with the storm, causing the storm, actually has a basis in science, that these birds were heavy, and the denser air that precedes a thunderstorm would allow them to swoop down lower than they normally would and be seen better. So the Indians would see them more often at the approach of a storm or during a storm, and therefore kind of equated the two together, whereas they actually were hunting and being able to be more predatory towards creatures in lower-lying areas only during storms. So the Indians took the correlation and created the mythology around it.
Interesting. Patty, you and Scott both, you're just encyclopedias of information. I enjoy talking to you so much and all the wonderful stories that you have.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing with us.
It was really great for you guys to come on the program and talk with us, and especially Patty with all her stories, and Scott with his technology. But I really enjoy that part of it. But thanks a lot, guys.
It does get addicting, Mark.
What was that, Scott?
I said it does get addicting. Once you start into it, you just keep going.
It really does, and we've actually, I consider the stuff that Scott is doing on the very cutting edge of this is the next generation that he has brought us in terms of paranormal investigating or ghost hunting, whatever you want to call it. And it's really I'm looking forward to once this. In fact, I talked to him. I asked him. I said, "What am I going? I need to call this something in my book. Can I call it the Crownover technique for photography?" And so that's what it's going to be called, the Crownover technique, in print. And so it's really exciting, and I'm looking forward to when this technique is more widely used, what people are going to come up with.
Well, I always enjoy working with you both so much because not only does something interesting always happen, but we always get great EVP, usually Class A, and we also have great pictures, as well as the confirmation of having Patty there and being able to know some of the history about what may have happened there previously.
Yeah.
Well, we feel the same way. It's a lot of fun to just do ghost hunting and to talk with people who are as interested and intelligent and conversant with all of the technology and all of the work as we are, and we really appreciate the opportunity to do so.
Well, thank you again, Patty and Scott, for coming and being on our show. It's a pleasure, as always. And thank you so much to our listeners of Ghost Talkers on the ghostchannel.tv. Rest in peace.